So this module is going to be dedicated to growth and some of the other biological phenomenon associated with it. After this introduction, we move into the various forms of metamorphosis. You are probably familiar with the standard holometaboly and hemimetaboly, and of course ametaboly, but there are also other forms of metamorphosis that you're going to learn about, and they are quite intricately tied to specific orders of insects. Mediating a lot of metamorphosis is, of course, the hormones and the relative changes in the concentration of important hormones. Now, for this course, we are learning about hormones quite broadly, and we do have a particular emphasis on specific hormones intricately associated with metamorphosis and growth. But to say that they are the only hormones that are important is not quite correct. There is just a wealth of knowledge out there about hormones that we don't have enough time to cover in a course like this. You then go and move on to things like molting and the processes that are important when that occurs. Of course, remembering that molting is an important step that insects need to undertake in order to get larger. Now, one thing that's really cool about the insect's ability to undertake discrete stages of growth is that some stages are sort of protected enough or in a state where they can actually undergo diapause. And that is a phenomenon where basically all forms of metabolism go to suspended animation. They temporarily pause. It is largely driven by the environment, but it gives us an example of why insects are so well adapted, because they have this ability to suspend themselves in a state of like literally frozen in time, and then when the conditions are favorable, typically when it gets warmer or day length is extended, then they can come out of diapause and resume metabolic activity. And there are, in some cases, the phenomenon of circadian rhythms, where there are very deliberate and largely environmental cues that allow insects to perform specific behaviors over a chronological 24-hour clock. So that gives you an overview of the module. But just as a very, very quick revision, I think it is very worthwhile just revising this, the molting cycle. So we do start with an intermolt phase here, which you can see that the cuticle and the epidermis are at the moment still in physical contact with each other, right? And then you move on to a apolysis stage. If you remember, we talked about that in a previous video, where now the insect is about to get ready for ecdysis. So apolysis here, you'll notice, is two things occur. One, there's actually an increase in the epidermal layer in terms of the cell number, or in some cases, we'll learn later on, the cell ploidy. But physically, they're contained in that locked space. But simultaneously, the cuticle is actually being relieved from the epidermal layer, and it forms basically an opportunity for the layer of epidermis underneath to start secreting new cuticle, right? So there is a period of time where there is a replication of the epidermis, right? And the new cuticle being secreted. So there is a very, very short phase just before ecdysis where the insect essentially has two cuticles, all right? This undergoes mitosis or endoreplication. We'll cover that later in a separate video. And then, of course, the insect prepares for ecdysis by then, again, putting some space between the old cuticle and new cuticle and fill it with molting fluid. Remember, in a previous module, we learned about glands, and the glands can secrete this molting fluid into that space, and then ecdysis can occur,